Hello, everyone. I'm Joel Chasnoff, and welcome to Inside Israel. It's February 6th, 2024, and tonight's episode is called Cloudy with a Chance of Missiles. This is actually the name of a chapter in Israel 201, the book I co-wrote with Benji Lovett, which is exploring Israel, but I thought it's very appropriate as a name for tonight's episode, because tonight what I want to do is share three stories about forecasts. So much about life here right now in Israel is completely unpredictable. So that means everyone here is trying to do a lot of predicting. Everyone is pontificating on what's going to come next and what the future holds and trying to make sense of everything we've been through up until now. But just like the weatherman on the news, the forecasts that Israelis are making are predictions. They're maybe based on probabilities, but they are not certainties. So, what I want to share with you tonight is a little bit about what Israelis are talking about and what predictions we are making as we try to make sense of the world we're living in here. So, the first thing I want to mention about what Israelis are talking about, and it's appropriate to the title of this episode, is the weather. The weather is a huge story right now in Israel. And if you're not living here, you might not realize that, but winter is always a rainy season in Israel. It absolutely does not rain in the summer. From about May 1st till September 1st, you can pretty much guarantee there will never be rain. And then between September 1st and April 30th, you'll get rain throughout the winter and early spring. But usually, winter in Israel means a rainy day followed by two sunny days, and then two rainy days and five sunny days. It's sporadic. But we've had about 14, 15 straight days of rain. And I'm talking about absolute, as we say in Hebrew, mabul, a flood, pouring rain here in Israel with no sunshine. And today was actually the first day that the sun came out and stayed out for more than 30 minutes. And that's what Israelis have been talking about. They've been talking about this insane rainy season that we are going through. The Kinneret, this is Lake Kinneret in the Galilee. This is the source of Israel's water. And for most of Israel's history, there's been this dread that we were running out of water and that the Kinneret water level was way too low. This is always every winter. The story is we're not getting enough rain. The Kinneret level is dropping. What are we going to do? It's a crisis. Well, right now, the Kinneret is 1.5 meters from its maximum allowable height. If it were to be a meter and a half higher, Israel would have a major crisis on its hands. And I would say another major crisis on its hands, as if we don't have enough to worry about. So we're now 1.5 meters from the Kinneret being too high. Now it's very unrealistic that it would actually get another meter and a half higher. It would take a lot more rain consecutively for that to happen. But this is what Israelis lately have been talking about, the weather. And I read somewhere that it's the first time in 30 years that we've had such an enormous amount of rain in such a short period of time. And of course, all of this, the backdrop is the war itself. Whenever it pours like this, the first thing I think about, and many people here think about, are our soldiers in Gaza. Let me tell you, I was a former tank soldier in the IDF in the 188th Armored Brigade, and tanks are a huge pain to deal with in the most perfect of weather. They require an enormous amount of maintenance. They're these incredible fighting machines, so sturdy and stable, but they're also so vulnerable at the same time to mud and dirt. And when it is raining like this, the thought of what tank soldiers and combat engineers in particular need to go through to maintain their equipment, it's downright depressing. I remember when I was stationed in the Golan Heights and it would rain, our entire schedule was taken over by how to maintain our tanks and clean them and literally taking apart the treads to clean the mud out. So this weather, it's not like weather everywhere else where people might say, "Oh, it's cold, it's rainy." That's annoying. Here, there's a real backdrop to it, which is we have our soldiers serving in Gaza, and we know that they have to deal with as well. And to be fair, a lot of us, including myself, are also thinking of all the Gazans in mostly southern Gaza right now. Hamas is our enemy, and they're embedded among the Gazan people, but that doesn't mean that there's not a humanitarian crisis happening there as well. And we're thinking, many of us, about the citizens of Gaza as well, who've been displaced and whose conditions are horrific, all the more so in this winter weather. I'll also say that the weather it's added another layer to the depression and the anxiety that a lot of Israelis are feeling. A new study came out this week showing that sleep disorders are at a higher than normal level. Anxiety is at a higher than normal level among Israelis. Many Israelis are requesting prescriptions for anxiety medication from their doctors more than the usual. So the clouds and the pall that's thrown over the country by this weather has made it all the more depressing. And of course, there are the hostages. We are learning more and more about the conditions that the hostages have been going through, whether it's being literally kept in jailed cells that have been dug underground, sleeping on chairs or on the ground itself without blankets. And we know that the cold and rainy weather makes it even worse for them. So, yeah, the weather is, believe it or not, one of the big topics that people have been speaking about here. I must say today, as I mentioned, the sun was out for the first time, and the forecast for the next week does look to be sunny or partly cloudy with no rain expected. So we're all sort of a collective sigh of relief that things might be a little more back to normal. But that's been a hot topic of conversation. So what else are we talking about when we talk about forecasts? Well, another very big forecast is the war in the north. And I gotta say that Israelis talk about the situation with our enemies the way other people talk about the weather. When Israelis say things are getting hot up north, we do not mean the temperature. What we're talking about is the situation with Hezbollah. And right now, it is becoming more and more apparent to all of us that there is going to be some sort of war with Hezbollah. I don't know any Israeli who thinks that a war with Hezbollah is not going to happen. Now, the predictions, the forecasts are different depending on who you ask. There are some, including journalists I really respect a lot, who are saying that this year is that this war with Hezbollah will happen in the next 5 years. So it's inevitable, and 5 years is the timeline. At the other end of the spectrum, there are mumblings and rumors that this war is going to happen within a week. And on WhatsApp, there are documents circulating right now. We got one ourselves from the city of Ra'anana telling us to stock up on food, to purchase a generator, to make sure we have enough bottled water, and to start filling empty bottles with water. They're predicting electricity would go out, perhaps for a long period of time, or perhaps waving blackouts for certain numbers of hours through the day. This is on official letterhead from the city of Ra'anana. Now, the other part of the story is this letter did not come to us from the city of Ra'anana. It came to us from someone who knows someone else who works at the city office, the city hall. And so we don't know if this is actual. We don't know if this is a leak. We don't know if someone concocted this document themselves and is just sending it around. But the rumors are very, very strong that a war is coming very, very soon. Some are saying that summer. A lot of people I know in the army are saying that we're waiting till summer. And it's so odd to say that the war is coming, but we're waiting a few months, putting it off as if it's, cleaning out the garage, something we know we have to do, but don't really want to get to yet. But I think it is more and more obvious to Israelis that this war is going to happen. And the question is why? The big reason is that Israel has learned what happens when we have enemies so close to us along the border. That's what happened with Hamas. They were right on our border and they were able to get through. And we know that as terrible as Hamas is, as lethal as Hamas was, they're actually quite small and non-threatening compared with the might of Hezbollah. You know, when it comes to rockets, Hamas has rockets that they fire, and it's kind of like throwing a bunch of rocks into the wind. You don't know where they're going to land. You just hope you hit something. That's basically what Hamas does when they fire a rocket. They hope to hit a building, they hope to hit a car or people, but most of their rockets really don't make it anywhere. I think somewhere between 10 and 30% fall within Gaza itself. The others fall in open fields, and the rest, most of the time, we're able to shoot down with Iron Dome. So Hamas's rockets are bothersome. For the most part, they really are not lethal and don't pose a threat to daily life here, aside from having us run into our bomb shelters over and over and the PTSD that results from it. But in terms of actual hits, it's actually very unlikely that, despite the fact that they've fired well over 10,000 rockets in the past few years at us. Now, Hezbollah in the north, completely different story. First of all, they have more rockets. We're hearing, I mean, the number I hear is between 30 and 40,000. But what's really frightening about Hezbollah's rockets is that they are targeted. They can, for lack of a better way of explaining it, punch in an address, and they can hit the Kiryat, which is the central command in Tel Aviv, or they can take out a power plant or natural gas resources or any other target that they want to hit, and it will fall within 50, 100, 200 meters of their target. And when you have 40,000, all you need to do is launch a few at that target, and you're bound to hit it. So it is a much more lethal threat from Hezbollah. And when they are so close to the border, we've learned that we have to push them back, not just to get their rockets out of range, but also to get them away from the fence itself. You know, Hezbollah also has an extensive tunnel network that they have been building below ground, with the idea being that they would pose some sort of similar attack to the one Hamas pulled off on October 7th. We need to push Hezbollah away from the border. Now, what's ironic here is that the same United Nations, who is always calling out Israel, and I've said this before, but I really never get tired of hammering home this point, that in 2023, the United Nations condemned Israel 14 times and condemned the rest of the world a combined 8 times. The same United Nations has a statute on the books calling for Hezbollah to be away from Israel's border. There is a demilitarized zone that the United Nations simply is not enforcing. So according to UN regulations, Hezbollah is not even supposed to be near the border at all. But they are, because the United Nations isn't enforcing it. The Lebanese government this week said that we don't have the manpower and we don't have the equipment to monitor Hezbollah and to push them away from the border. So Hezbollah basically has free reign to operate in Lebanon wherever they want. And that means that they are a threat to us. And Israel has learned that we cannot let these threats just sit there while we assume that our technology is better and our soldiers is better and that we can actually handle them if push comes to shove. We saw that that line of thinking is incorrect. So that's why it's looking like a war is inevitable. And this week we began, we drink club soda and water sometimes out of 1.5 liter bottles. We've been saving those bottles and filling them up. We're looking into buying a generator, the canned food, and others are as well. So it's on our minds. This is another forecast that we are dealing with, this impending war with Hezbollah. And the third story of forecast that I want to touch on is the war in Gaza itself. At this point, no one really knows where this war in Gaza is heading. And once again, we are hearing very different things depending on the source. I've heard some people say that the military at this point doesn't have a plan, that their plan was to go into Gaza and take control of the north to push Hamas back. so that their rockets would be out of range. And if you look at the number of rockets coming into Israel from Gaza right now, it is far, far lower than it ever was. And they're, once in a blue moon, it will reach Tel Aviv, but for the most part, they're hitting only the south. They're really not able to fire rockets at us the way they used to. And that we wanted to take over the center, Khan Yunis, Gaza City. But now that we're moving into the south of Gaza, it really is becoming an essential question. What is the plan at this point? And no one really knows what the plan is. There really is no viable plan that is being spoken of. So that's what we're hearing in the media. That's what we're hearing from some journalists, in most journalists actually, and experts. Now, at the same time, I'm always in touch with military people as well and have pretty good contacts there. And I never like to swear on this podcast, but once in a while I think it's appropriate. And what I'm hearing from the soldiers and officers that I know who are in Gaza is that Hamas is getting their ass kicked, that we are absolutely decimating them, and that they are a broken organization. The number we're hearing today is that 10,000 of Hamas's militants have been either killed or so badly injured that they are no longer able to fight. 10,000, when we were estimating before that all of Hamas was 20 to 30,000, that means between a half and a third are completely out of commission, in that 2/3 of their battalions have been completely destroyed. We're hearing that Yahweh Sinwar, the architect of October 7th, is at this point on the run, just going from one hideout to another, using hostages to protect him, but that he is on the run. And we're also hearing some Hamas officials, through back channels, and this was actually published in Israeli media, that they're saying they need a ceasefire because their families are being killed, and that is what is getting to them right now. So we're hearing different things. The most complicated part of this war is about to happen, or is happening now, as we move into the south of Gaza. As I've explained before, the population of 1.8 million Gazans is now pushed almost entirely into the south of Gaza. And the last really big battle that we're going to have is Rafah, the Rafah crossing, the Rafah area on the border with Egypt. And it's complicated because we have so many civilians there. We have the tunnel network, which is extensive in that part of the country. And also because Hamas is now living amongst that population there. So it's becoming harder and harder to target Hamas itself as they dress as civilians and live amongst civilians. And this raises the question of just what should Israel do right now? Should we go pedal to the metal and try to complete this mission of dismantling or destroying Hamas? How likely is that? Or should we broker some sort of deal for the hostages and try to get them released? I'll tell you what I think, and this is just my opinion. I do think that the military pressure is working. I do think that Hamas is more and more devastated by the day. We're also arresting a lot of Hamas militants, many of whom participated in the October 7th attacks, and that means we're getting intelligence from them. And we have to be honest here. When you're talking about dismantling a terrorist organization with 20 to 30,000 members strong, it's not going to happen in 4 months. This is a long-term project. And we had patience during those first few weeks. I think a lot of people's patience is running out, and we expect more results right now, but that's unrealistic. It seems to me that we really are getting to them. And one very good argument is that we need to keep up this mission and just put as much pressure on them as possible and really attempt to destroy them. Now, the other side of it is, what about the hostages? Well, let's look at that argument. Let's look at what's happening with the hostages right now. You have to ask, how likely is it that we're actually going to get these hostages back? At the moment, there are 136 hostages still in Gaza. However, that includes 32 that we have already concluded have been killed at this point. So really, we're talking about 104. And off the record, we are hearing that there might be 20 more that have already been killed in captivity. So again, the question becomes, how likely is it? And I'm not saying we should give up on trying to get them back if we decide, well, it's unlikely we ever would. But we have to realistically ask, what would the scenario be where we could get hostages back? If you watch the news at all and follow it, you see that there have been intense talks over the past week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks about some sort of new hostage deal. But we need to discuss that a second. Who wants a hostage deal? Hamas is saying that there will be no hostage deal unless we have a complete end to the war, not a ceasefire for 45 days, which Israel has paused, or 30 days, or 90 days, but a complete end to the war in which we withdraw from Gaza. And a lot of Israelis believe that that is a non-starter, that the fact that we have Hamas where we have them right now, to end the war and pull out of Gaza completely would be a mistake. It would just allow Hamas to regroup and allow this kind of attack to happen again. And they've made no secret about this. Hamas has said numerous times that their goal is to pull off more October 7th style attacks. So how realistic that this ceasefire, if we agreed to one, would actually be respected by our enemy? The other thing we need to take into account here is our own leadership. And I'd like to go over some of the big news stories of the week. One of the big news stories is the hostages and the hostage discussion, but another one is the government in Israel right now. And what we're seeing more and more is that the prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is trapped. His back is in a corner. One thing we're seeing is Netanyahu really isn't able at this point to control his own government. His government exists simply because he has a few right-wing extremists who have agreed to go along with his coalition. The Knesset has 120 members, to remind you. To have a majority, you obviously need 50% plus one. That means 61 is what's needed to maintain a majority in the Knesset. We have 64 in the current coalition. So if just 4 members of this coalition were to drop out, this government would fall apart. Netanyahu would no longer be the prime minister. That means that there's really 2, 3, 4 characters who can pretty much do whatever they want, and Netanyahu can't reprimand them, he can't scold them, he can't control them, because if he does, they've threatened over and over, like a spoiled child who doesn't get his or her way and says, I won't go to bed unless I get my story or my candy or my whatever. These right-wing extremists over and over have been saying, well, if you don't do this, I'm leaving the government. They've said this numerous times, and Netanyahu has given in to them every single time. Itamar Ben-Gvir, while Israel was on trial at The Hague for genocide, and one of the reasons we were on trial is not just for the bombings we've carried out in Gaza, but because of speech. The bar is very low at The Hague to be found negligent or to be found guilty of inciting genocide. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. You just have to prove, not even prove, but display plausibility. And one of the pieces of evidence they can use against you is the speech of your leaders. And we have Itamar Ben-Gvir last week, while Israel was on trial at The Hague, again recommending voluntarily emigration of Gazans from Gaza. Now, maybe off the record, this is a good idea. Maybe the way all these countries in Europe have taken in refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and what have you, maybe it would make sense that they would take in the people of Gaza. But there's such a thing as tact on the world stage, and words matter, speech counts, and you need to know that you can't say things like this out loud and assume there won't be consequences. Ben-Gvir this week was tweeting that Trump would have been better for Israel than Biden. You can argue whether or not it's actually true Trump would or would not be better. I personally don't think so. But, Even if you do think so, it's not the kind of thing you say out loud when the president in power in the US is your ally and is trying to push through military aid and is on the world stage condoning Hamas and saying that Israel needs to dismantle Hamas. And even if they call for us to be allowing more aid in and more humanitarian, whatever that means, in our attacks in Gaza, they are supporting us. It is not the right thing to do. It is uncouth to criticize the president in power when he has been helping him. Most Israelis do support Biden, by the way, and think that Biden has been good to Israel. And Netanyahu can't get Ben Gvir to stop doing this because, like I said, Ben Gvir is the key to this coalition, along with a few others. We had an incredible thing happen in Gaza. We had an incredible thing happen in the West Bank in the past few days. The IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, the Israeli army, carried out a drill. And in their drill, they had some of their soldiers dressed up as right-wing extremist Jews, and other Israeli soldiers were dressed as Palestinian civilians. And the rest were soldiers, IDF soldiers in training. And in this drill, the right-wing extremist Jews, those who were acting as the right-wing extremist Jews, kidnapped those who were acting as the Palestinian civilians. Apparently, Israeli intelligence believes that these right-wing extremists in the West Bank have plans to kidnap Palestinians and hold them hostage the same way that Israelis are being held hostage in Gaza, perhaps as a tit for tat, perhaps to say, now we have your hostages, now you need to let ours go. But apparently, Israel believes that these right-wing extremists in the West Bank are planning some sort of kidnapping scheme where they would kidnap Palestinians. And I've said many times in this podcast that the right-wing extremists in the West Bank are a huge detriment to Israeli society for many reasons. And once again, Netanyahu can't do anything about it. They rarely are reprimanded. They rarely go to jail or are punished in any way or arrested in any way. And the reason is that Netanyahu needs those politicians who support the right-wing extremists in his coalition. And I'm going to say again what I've said last week and other times, that I think in the next 5 years, and maybe even a shorter time frame than that, it's possible that we will see the assassination of a Jewish leader in Israel. And certainly, I think some sort of Jew-on-Jew violence as those in the West Bank become more and more violent and their actions go unchecked. But that's another example of how Netanyahu isn't even able to control his own government. Now, we have to talk about the hostages as well when it comes to Netanyahu. How much does Netanyahu want the hostages released? I think there's a very good argument for saying that Netanyahu does not want the hostages released. Or let me rephrase that he doesn't want a deal that would release the hostages. Of course, he wants them released, but he doesn't want a deal. And here's why. If we release the hostages with a ceasefire, an end to the war, then he's done. There will be no more Netanyahu. His power will be over. His reign will have come to an end. Netanyahu needs this war to go on as long as possible in order for him to stay in power. He knows that his approval rating is in the 20% and it's going down. People trust him less and less. And there's now accusations in the Israeli press that Netanyahu himself is trying to sabotage a deal for the hostages. And this isn't me saying this. This is in the Israeli press. And here's how that thinking goes. That over the past few weeks, and you can see his statements, Netanyahu has come out saying that any type of ceasefire is simply unacceptable to Israel. We will not even discuss a ceasefire. It's a non-starter. And by saying this over and over, he's making clear to Hamas that we are not going to have any sort of hostage deal. So they can put forward any sort of agreement or any sort of proposal they want, and we're not going to accept it. And I think there's some legitimacy to this. I mean, if there is a deal that brings the hostages home, then you have to ask what would keep Netanyahu in power at that point. So I think he needs this war to go on. And if that means keeping the hostages there a little bit longer, there are many, many in Israel, myself included, who would not put it past him to do that. Now, at the same time, we have to look at the other side of it, which is maybe he's right. Maybe that doing anything other than completely defeating and completely dismantling Hamas would be a mistake. And if that's the case, then the argument would be that he is correct to say that ending the war is a non-starter. You know, in polls, when you poll Israelis about what they want, many of them say we want some sort of deal to bring the hostages home, but many of them also say that we do not want a complete ceasefire. We do not want a complete end to the war. The deals that Hamas is saying that they would agree to cannot comply with both of those. We had, I think, a rejection just today. Hamas rejected Israel put forward a proposal that would have called for a very long ceasefire and the release of many, many Palestinian prisoners. But Hamas rejected it, saying that anything short of a complete ceasefire would be rejected by us. And so I'll say what I've said before, that I just can't imagine what kind of deal for the hostages would transpire in the coming days. I just can't think of the scenario where it would happen between the dynamics of Hamas, the needs of Netanyahu, and just the general attitude of the Israeli public toward the war and the hostages, which is contradictory. I don't see how it would happen. Now, there are countries that are calling for the recognition of a Palestinian state, sort of an unconditional recognition. And what they're actually saying is a demilitarized Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. And I'm sure that one of the clauses would be that Israel pull all of its settlers out of the West Bank. I personally, I would favor a demilitarized Palestinian state, and emphasize demilitarized. The world would have to do a good job of making sure it is actually demilitarized and that Hamas is no longer able to operate. But that's what Israel needs, is some sort of demilitarized separation from our enemies. But the settlers would have to come out of the West Bank, the Jewish settlers, I mean. I don't see how that would happen with this government. And frankly, if another government were to do that, I think that's where you would see some of the Jew-on-Jew violence that I'm talking about. So I don't know how realistic that is as well. But these are the forecasts that Israelis are trying to deal with and trying to predict. What is this war in the north going to be like? What is going to happen with this current war in Gaza? And when are the hostages going to come home? Now, in a minute, we have an interview with Dorit, who's going to talk to you about the projects that she's been working on, which I know a lot of you are curious about. But before we do that, I just want to share a little tidbit. You know, I've been in Israel now exactly 2 weeks. Feels like I never left. Like once I'm home, it just feels like I've always been here. But in these 2 weeks, even my attitude toward the attitude has changed over these 2 weeks. I was out in Tel Aviv tonight. I had a staff dinner for some of the people who work with me, for me, and we went to a really, nice restaurant in the heart of Tel Aviv. And we had a wonderful time. And the place was full, and people were walking around on the streets, having normal conversations. And I was reminded of just how cool and awesome Tel Aviv is. It's a really great city. But there was a part of me that really felt that we are beginning to forget the hostages more and more. Now, certainly not the ones who are the families and friends of the hostages and who know somebody in Gaza who's hostage. But for the rest of us, we're never going to completely forget them. And there are posters everywhere, in billboards everywhere you walk, and on park benches, there are photos of the hostages. But every day, they're just that little bit more out of our minds. And I wonder what that means for the fate of the hostages, too. certainly there are protests in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and other places by the families and the friends and those who really are standing up for the hostages. But in so many ways, Israelis are going on with the rest of our lives, certainly in the center of the country. And on the one hand, that's positive that we're so resilient and able to move forward. But on the other hand, it's sad that we are able to adapt and move on and laugh and enjoy the normal aspects of life and not be as pained by the hostage situation as we were before. I do have questions of yours that I'm going to get to in just a little bit, but right now I want to bring on Dorit, who did a real mitzvah of waking up here at 3 o'clock in the morning here in Israel. Dorit, are you on? Because I have a lot of people on my screen. I don't see them yet. Doritush, if you hear me, please say hi. Hang on. I'm not allowing you? Apparently I didn't allow Dorit to come in. Sorry, 1 second. Here we go. Ah, I can unmute you. There you go, sweetie.
Okay, I'm
All
with
right.
you.
Hi, Dorit.
Hi.
So I'm going to attempt to pin your video to the screen. If those of you who don't know, Dorit is my wife, and the reason I wanted to have her here is because Dorit has been doing some incredible work, volunteering and really doing grassroots support for Israelis of every type, whether it's, I think soldiers is the main group, but also just ordinary Israelis who've been displaced from their homes and who are in need of help of any kind. And I just wanted to speak to her about what kind of work she's been doing, and I think even more so than that, the emotional side to it and what her work means to her. So first of all, Boker Tov, Dorit. Thanks for getting up at 3:30.
Boker Tov, Erev
All right.
Tov.
And say hi to everyone. You have a lot of fans in this group. A lot of people have been emailing me asking for your email address because they want to help. The first thing I want to tell you is just, I'm really proud of you. You've done incredible work here, and to demonstrate it, I'm sitting here with a it's sort of blurry on my screen, but this is a state-of-the-art infantry helmet. Dorit just organized how many helmets like this that you just brought over?
No, now this time is only 9.
This time only
But,
9, but these helmets are state of the art. They are better than anything I had when I was in the army, and they're absolutely top of the line. And it took a lot of work for you to bring this over, but this is exactly the kind of grassroots work that you are doing, and I'm really proud of you for that. So one thing you said to me today that I want to ask you about is that the biggest crisis on October 7th was the loss of faith. What do you mean? And I want you to explain to the audience what you mean by that crisis on October 7th, beyond the horrors of the massacre that happened.
I'm talking about people who waited for help for hours and hours, thinking that if they hear some shooting out of the houses, somebody will come and save them, maybe in 5 minutes, maybe in an hour. But even after 24 hours, some people came and waited for help, and nobody came. So this is one thing. I mean, people felt alone, and even after, when people displaced from their houses and needed to be organized, people felt alone. I think the reaction was late to come, and the support was late to come. And I think what the civilians who stand up and try to organize, and organize amazingly, this is what I think bringing back faith, that there's somebody to fight for. This is what I'm facing every day with people who really appreciate the work of the different projects that many civilians helped actually organize and help and really support the soldiers and the evacuees and people who, yeah.
So one thing I've noticed is just from my conversations with you is the wide range of people that you've been working with. as you've done these volunteer projects, it really goes beyond just the scope of Ra'anana or a certain type of person. You've met people from all across Israeli society, and it's changed your view of Israel by doing that. So tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's an important angle here.
Yes, I'm actually one of, if I can say that during the war it's exciting, but it's one of the most exciting things is to see that from, I'm working with Druze, with Arab, I'm working with ultra religious people, and they all really want to help. They want to do something to be vital, to be essential for what's going on here, to help the country. And it's amazing. I mean, one of these soldiers that I'm working with is from the Nadvorna Hasidut. How would you say Hasidut? I don't know.
The ultra Orthodox.
Totally. He cannot go with his uniform back home. And he's working in
Why can't
Shura
he go with his uniform back home?
because it's not acceptable.
To be in the army, if you're
No,
from this
no.
sect of Judaism. And we're talking about a Jewish
Right.
soldier, ultra-Orthodox Jew.
Yes.
Okay. And you're working with him.
Yeah, he's working in Shura, which is the base where they identify body. And so we supply them with shoes and jackets and whatever they needed because they're working in an open field. But it's been amazing. Like even the relationship we have, like the talk, it's just incredible. I meet people that, if not the war, I would never had the chance to meet them. And it's just amazing to see how many people really, I mean, I'm working with 17 years old girl who opened a project to support the soldiers coming to refreshment with fresh food. And it's, I couldn't believe it. And I'm working with, we supply 26 new ultra-Orthodox religious soldiers who've been left the house and there's no support from the house.
Can I just cut in? I want to explain this story that there are 26 ultra-Orthodox soldiers. Like normally they would not be drafted into the Israeli army, but they decided, these 26, that they want to join the Israeli army. And they're actually categorized as lone soldiers. Typically a lone soldier is someone like me who comes from another country and volunteers, and my parents aren't here, so I'm a lone soldier. But these guys are also lone soldiers because their families disowned them the minute they chose to join the Israeli army. And they're joining up, these ultra-Orthodox soldiers, with nothing. Right, Dorit? And so tell us what that means, nothing, and what you guys are doing to help them.
They came with a plastic bag to the Bakum where they drafted to the army.
Induction center.
Yeah, exactly. So we supply them with, it's always working with cooperation with other organization or other team or other projects that's working. We supply them with shoes, with a big bag, with clothing, everything they needed for like any soldier who drafted to the army, we supply them with. So it was really, this is one of the most emotional projects we've been working with.
Now, a lot of the questions I've been getting from my listeners, and it's a question I've had myself, is why do we even need to be doing this? Like, we have an Israeli army. Why are you raising money for helmets? Why are you supplying jackets to the elite ski unit in the Golan Heights? There's a unit, an Israeli army unit that operates on skis in the Hermon, near the Hermon mountain in the northern part of the Golan Heights. Why do you and other people like you have to do this? Why is the IDF not doing it? And maybe the other part of the question is, do you care that you are the one having to do it, or have you simply put that question aside?
It's a great question, really. I think the army, it's not that the army doesn't do it, it's just the army wasn't ready for 300,000 more soldiers than they usually have. So they weren't ready for that. So the the soldiers who are in the mandatory service, they supplied with everything, especially the special units. But the reserve soldier had to find by themselves. They pretty much raised money to equip themselves. So this is where we came, and we tried to supply them. I saw that somebody asked, supply come from the state, supply come from companies in Israel. It's depend what.
These helmets came in a checked bag from the United States. Exactly. And someone asked how much each helmet is.
It's about $500 each helmet.
Right, and you brought 9 of them on this on
Well,
this shipment.
we bought many. I took 9 because I need exactly 9 for a special unit. Yeah.
Right, but there are others that you brought over as well.
Yeah.
So look, there are many organizations doing a lot of work. Jewish Federation, JNF.
Can
I
I
mean,
add one? Can I
oh,
add one
please,
thing?
please.
Because you asked a question and I didn't finish. The
Well,
I'm sorry.
this is just like our normal relationship. I love this.
Still love you.
It's okay. Go on.
Um, 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 so the question why not other organization would do it or the army won't do it, I stopped asking this question because I felt like if I would deal with that day after day, I wouldn't do anything. So this is important to understand that we investigate every request we have to make sure that this request is really a good, like a normal request, a legitimate request. Because if somebody want equipment for themselves to have a helmet to go home with, then it's not really legitimate request, and we need to understand that. So because I'm working with I officer in the army, I check request and I see that it's legitimate, and this is how we work it.
So what's the difference between the work you guys are doing, you and the few people you're working with, and these big organizations, like I mentioned, Jewish Federation, JNF? I mean, they've done great work. There are probably 100 more really great organizations in the US, Canada, Israel, around the world. What is different about what you guys are doing and how you operate?
It's hard for me to tell what the big organization doing because I'm not sure because I'm not involved with that. Maybe you can give the answer better than I do, but I think they're working more with infrastructure, and we working with the direct soldiers. They have the immediate needs, even to buy night vision for soldier who go to fields and they don't have night vision, and this is immediate needs. I feel like we're working here like in a way an emergency room and figure out what's the immediate needs the first, and then we go in with the other needs that it's not really immediate. We bought special equipment for special unit. We raised money. In 2 days, we had to buy very special equipment for some units. We raising money for drones, which are more eyes for the soldier and literally save life. We even raised money to buy a special landing field for some equipment like drone. It's not drones, but some equipment that really save life. Different equipment that we've been asking, we investigate, we see that this is really immediate needs. We make sure to raise money.
I think the span of time between receiving money and spending the money on a direct project is one big difference. Like when you say we need X number of helmets, you raise the money, and a week later, the unit
2
will have
days.
the helmet. 2 days. Okay. So it's not that the money is lost in these other organizations, but it's immediate and it's direct, and the red tape is minimal, and you also know exactly where it's going, and it's project by project. And I mean,
One more
that's just
thing,
what I've seen. Yeah, please.
we're working now on a simulator bus, which is a bus with 30 units of special computers with like a gaming kind of hardware. No, how do you say it?
Yeah.
A computer system. Yep. Okay. So, and I talked to the startup guy who actually invented it and figure out how to do it, because this is 72 weeks of training. Well, the war today is a very unique war. You probably talked about it in a different podcast, that this is the first war that really many units cooperate, the Air Force and the troops, and they cooperate together. So it's different kind of method of fighting. So the training is really essential. Now, if the army will come and build this bus with a 30 units of training station, training 2,000 soldiers a week, it will take them about a year to build it, and it will cost them 5 times more than it will cost this project for us. So that's saving money and saving time, and this is really crucial. Just for example, how long it takes because of bureaucracy and relationship.
Let me just sum up what this bus is. It's a bus with 30 computer terminals in the bus, and soldiers sit at the computer terminals, and what they're really trying to do is train the soldiers how to work with other units. It's been estimated that probably 20% of the deaths of Israeli soldiers in this Gaza war have been by what we call friendly fire, either accidentally firing at our own troops or misfires or explosions that weren't supposed to go off. A lot of it is due to the coordination of all these different units, Air Force with infantry, with combat engineers who are underground and laying dynamite to blow up tunnels and tanks protecting them. And there have been, I mean, that's all deaths are sad, but the idea that 20% of the deaths happen because of our own forces firing upon each other or explosives going off too early. This bus is the idea is that soldiers can train on these computer terminals about how to communicate and go over the commands to work with other units. And why is it a bus? So it can drive around the country to the different army units. Instead of trying to get 30 soldiers to a base, we bring the base to them. And so this bus is the big project that Dorit's working on right now. I just have two more questions for you to Dorit, and then you can go back to bed. One is that I know you have big plans, like what to become like an official nonprofit. I literally don't know where you are with that right now. So just give us all an update on becoming official in some way.
Yeah, I'm working with two more people to build a nonprofit organization. We're working on a mailing list right now, and hopefully it will go the right direction. We feel like the impact of the war, as long as it will take, we will try to help here too. But we feel that the impact of the war is really, really strong. We have a lot of amputees. We have a lot of emotional support that we need to provide, and we're not 100% sure that the government will be helping enough. I mean, I know for fact from two Nova amputees that they're having only once a week support, like emotional support, like psychologists. But if the psychologist is sick this day, they won't have a treatment for 2 weeks. I mean, which is ridiculous. These people, so everybody, the two last one who've been surviving in the shelter. So we'll try to help with that. So we're figuring out that the impact will be long term. So
long after the war.
Yeah, exactly.
So my last question for you is, what has been I hate to use the word best because it's such a tragic time, this whole time we're going through, but what has been the most meaningful or the best part of this whole experience for you as someone who's been so involved?
I think, I mean, I feel sometimes that I'm really small compared to all big organization, or even people who work and doing a lot of amazing stuff here in Israel. It's incredible. And somebody told me that try to sleep with a mosquito in your room. Even the little job that we're doing here, it's giving a big impact. We host a lot of commander here in the house. Our kids know them very well. They come in all the time. They come in directly from Gaza. And I think one of the thing, and we sit with them and talk to them and having coffee and dinner, whatever they want. And one of the commander who finishes reserve service called me and he say, "You saved my life." And I say, "How did I save your life? I gave you just, fleece jacket and equipment and food and whatever you needed. How come I saved your life?" He said that the conversation was really supporting. And I hear it a lot that soldiers say that, the back that we give and the support that we give and means so much to them. They give them the motivation to fight for something, to really save this country, because this country is amazing. And this is what we see here. People from any spectrum, from everywhere, like they really want to help. And it's really moving and really emotional to see that. And it's incredible.
I know it's changed you personally because I see it myself, and you seem very fulfilled doing this difficult but meaningful work. So thanks for joining us. I'll put your name, your email in the chat, so if people want to get in touch and get on your mailing list, they can do so. I know you're still in the stages of building it to like something official and as a nonprofit, but I know that there are people who are going to want to be along for the ride. So Laila
Yeah.
Tov.
So
Thank you
thank
for
you.
joining. And I'll put your email right now. Dorit.admone@gmail.com. So for those of you listening, dorit.admone@gmail.com. And make sure you turn off the camera before you go to bed.
Sure.
All right. Toda. All right.
Bye-bye.
Let's get to some of your questions. A lot of you wrote in with questions this week. We've already been on almost an hour, so I am going to just do a few of them. Okay, question number one. Donna writes in, Haaretz just reported that the IDF has confirmed it is now flooding the tunnels in order to destroy them. And some of you asked this in the chat as well, so this is a big question a lot of you want to know. Haaretz just reported that the IDF is confirming it is now flooding the tunnels in order to destroy them. Are we concerned that the hostages are still in the tunnels? So yes, it has been confirmed that the IDF is flooding the tunnels. They did an experiment in December to see if this would actually work. Apparently it was successful. And how are they doing it? They're setting up pumps that are bringing in seawater from the Mediterranean to flood the tunnels. But what has been made clear is that they are flooding only tunnels where they are absolutely certain there are no hostages around. So I would imagine for the most part that these are tunnels that the IDF has identified, that they've been able to mark off. And now by flooding them, they're making them unusable as a way to move throughout and to transport. A lot of tunnels have these blast doors on them that separate them from other tunnels in the network. And by flooding those areas, they can guarantee that the water stays there with these blast doors, but doesn't harm anywhere we have hostages. So I am certain, without having heard it from the IDF, but the reports I'm reading are that we're only flooding tunnels where we know that there are no hostages there. But that's a great question. Someone else asked about the hostages and a plan, and I kind of already addressed that, so I'll move on to the next one. So someone wrote, I'm troubled. Karen wrote in, I'm troubled by what I saw today. Palestinians in the United States disrupting city council meetings, demanding a ceasefire. I just don't get it. They started the war. They act innocent, but never mention Israeli deaths at all. The US has only some control, but not all, over Israel's decisions. Why are Palestinians in the US disrupting proceedings here that aren't concerned with local issues in the United States? Wow, what a complicated question. But I think the answer here, once again, goes to the one-sidedness of so many people's view of this conflict. You know, as I've said before, 80% of Americans, given the choice, Hamas or Israel, support Israel. So by and large, Israel is supported. But I think that Palestinian and Arab populations, not just in the US, but in many countries, have realized that if they make a lot of noise, they get attention, whether it's marching in the streets of London or rioting in Berlin or disrupting these city council meetings in the United States, that they're able to wreak havoc and supposedly bring attention to their cause. You know, I don't know how effective it is. Like I mentioned before, a lot of pro-Gaza protesters were marching outside the Mayo Clinic in New York. I mean, this is a cancer that treats, a hospital that treats cancer patients, and the Mayo Clinic works with Israel to do some research. And so I think anytime you see Palestinian and pro-Gazans marching outside of cancer hospitals or blocking the roads and the airports, it could actually backfire on them and make people more upset with that cause. So part of me feels like they might want to keep on doing that because it actually makes Israel look better. But as for why they're doing it, I think it's to call attention. And it's based on the assumption that if they make enough noise, they can get their way. And I hate to say it, but in a lot of times it is working. I mean, there have been many, college campuses where there have been speakers, not just pro-Israel speakers, but speakers who wanted to give a fair and balanced portrait of what's happening in the Middle East, and they've been booed off the stage or rioted off the stage. Enough noise brings them down, and so in a way, all of this chaos that the pro-Gaza protesters are making, to an extent, it is effective. And I've said this before, I think a lot of governments are afraid of their own Arab populations, and so they want to appease them, and they can't come out too strongly in favor of Israel because they're afraid of what their own Arab populations might do. The last question we're going to get to, this comes from James. Why does the United States insist on a two-state solution when Palestinians insist they are not interested and plan to keep attacking Israel? It's a great question. I think the United States knows what a lot of people knows, which is that ultimately the only way to solve this situation in the Middle East is separation between Israel and those in the West Bank in Gaza. You can call it a two-state solution. You can call it an independent Palestinian state. You can call it a demilitarized zone, which is also a state. The bottom line is there needs to be separation. And the United States knows this now. And they know that this conflict, however this round ends, will only lead to another round if they simply allow for anything else to happen other than some sort of state for the Palestinian people in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip. And it's not just the US, it's European countries, but it's also countries in the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, others who want to be a little more part of the 21st century, but who are seeing the Palestinian question holding them back, are calling for separation and maybe even recognizing a Palestinian state unilaterally in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And the other thing this would do, and this is what probably the United States is thinking, is it would make the Palestinian side responsible for once, because right now they have not been held accountable. Everyone is saying that Israel needs to allow more aid in. Israel needs to not bomb hospitals. Israel needs to not bomb civilian areas. But no one is calling out Hamas. And the reason they're not is because they know that Hamas are terrorists. They're not respected actors on the world stage, but they're terrorists who can't be reined in. And this is why the United States, I think, is saying we need to have a state. Because when we do, for the Palestinian people, then there will be leadership that will be held accountable. So right now there is no one accountable, but if we can have a two-state solution, some sort of separation between Israel and the Palestinians, then there'll be some accountability on the other side as well. And they will have to hold up their end of the bargain in order to receive any aid or any other world support that having a state would bring to them. That's a complicated question. I hope I did a little bit of justice, and certainly we can get to it in future broadcasts and episodes. So before we conclude, I just want to share a few links, and I'll put them here. The first one I'm going to share is a new page of my website, beginning in early May, right after Passover. I'm doing a new tour called Yachad. Yachad is Hebrew for together. And this tour of the US and Canada in May is in honor of Israel's 76th birthday, Yom HaAtzmaut. And this is going to be a very difficult year to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut. And my belief is that we need to celebrate it, but we need to do it tastefully. And I plan to do it with some stories, an educational program, and real conversations about ethics in the IDF, and looking at tech studies to help us make sense of the ethical dilemmas that IDF soldiers deal with, and a number of other programs designed specifically for Jewish audiences in North America. So if you're interested in bringing that to your community, check out the link right there. It's just a page on my website, joelchasnoff.com/Yachad. If you click the link, you can learn all about that. And I have a full program brochure that I can send you as well. The other links I'm going to put up there real quick are for my website itself. If you want to get the links for these Zoom conversations, as well as my newsletter, you need to go to joelchasnoff.com, put your name and email in, and you'll get the link once a week. It's early here, please excuse me. You'll get the link once a week. I also have the links to these podcast episodes on Apple and on Spotify. If you can't join the live podcast here on Zoom, you can always go to Apple Podcasts or to Spotify and download the podcast there. Next week's conversation will be on Wednesday night. That is the 14th. So hopefully you'll go out with your beloved for Valentine's Day, and then come back home by 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time in order to enjoy next week's episode of Inside Israel. I'm flying on Tuesday to the United States. Unbelievably, my 3-week trip to Israel is already over in just a few days. So I'll be back in the US as of Tuesday of next week, and Inside Israel will take place Wednesday night, February 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, you can get the links at joelchesnoff.com by signing up for the newsletter. Keep your questions coming. The best way to answer them is through email, and you can find that on the website as well. Thank you so much for joining tonight. It was a pleasure to share Dorit's story with you, to answer your questions, and to bring a little bit more of what's happening in Israel to your eyes and ears. Lehitraot, toda rabah, and I'll see you next week. And I'll keep the chat open for a couple more minutes.